Schönen guten Abend, das war ein kleiner Auszug aus Untitled Chapter von Eliane Radigue in der Interpretation von Kasper Toeplitz, der hier mit uns sitzt. Die gestern da waren, haben das gestern schon gehört, das Stück. Und die noch nicht da waren, haben jetzt vielleicht eine kleine klangliche Brücke zu dem Gespräch. Wir sprechen jetzt gleich mit Kasper Toeplitz und mit Zinc Copper, Robin Hayward, Hilary Jeffrey und Eliane Radigue über ihre Zusammenarbeit mit Eliane Radigue, bevor es dann im zweiten Teil des Abends Locomotion und für Zinc Copper zu hören gibt. Ich bin selber mit Thomas Gläßer, ich werde das Gespräch so ein bisschen moderieren und würde gerne mit Kasper einsteigen, auch weil wir es gerade gehört haben. Die meisten von Ihnen sind wahrscheinlich mit dem Werk von Eliane Radigue so grob vertraut. Es geht los mit ihrer Lehrzeit sozusagen bei Pierre und Pierre Schaeffer. Ja. I switched to English. Most of you are probably familiar with the work of Eliane Radigue. There's a key moment in the 60s in Paris with her apprenticeship with Pierre and Pierre Schaeffer, where she is intrigued with finding music within sound, so in the musique concrète, and then taking up the tape feedback techniques of Pierre to explore microscopic sound developments in the stretched out, elongated tape feedbacks that she's layering and editing to make her first electronic pieces. And then comes a very long period where she's producing synthesizers, first encountered in 1970 at NYU, New York University, with the Buckler synthesizer that Morten Subotnick had installed there, and then soon continuing to work the ARP 2500 synthesizer that she stayed with for decades and had a very sort of intimate relationship with. And then there's a new phase around the turn of the millennium, when Kasper actually starts approaching her about writing for his bass computer. And yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit, Kasper.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sorry.
1 second.
Yeah.
That's your arrival of electricity music.
So around that time, Eliane had written for the synthesizer and basically working alone by herself in electronic music, still pursuing that same idea of finding music within sound. And then Kasper Toeplitz.
Yeah, I mean it was. I'm not used actually, and was not used to play music by other people. I did sometimes, but not very often. And I decided to do it only if it has a meaning. I mean, not just to play a piece by someone just because, but to change something, to make like a change in the life of that composer, or in my life, or maybe in music in general. And this is how I approached Eliane, because I discovered her electronic music like by the end of 1999, and I just came out of the blue and asked her, I met her by filming with an American composer, and I asked her to write a piece for me. And this is something she has never done before. And she told me no, so I insisted. And then for quite a long time, she said yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, and finally yes. And yeah, it was very interesting, not only for me, but mostly for her, because she never before that wrote any piece for a musician. She included one piano player in one piece, but he was playing on top of electronic sounds. But like to write a piece for someone, it was her very first thing. So how it went, it's a very nice thing. You said it's a piece for bass computer, which is not true. It's a piece actually for me, because the way she treats the musicians, she said that the only scores of her music are the musicians themselves. So if you want to play, I don't know, a cello piece, there is no score, but you have to go to see the person who created, who premiered that piece. And she said that the musicians are the living scores of her music, which is kind of true. And the nice thing, what I really appreciated, we did work quite a long time, a few months, with Eliane coming very frequently to my studio, listening to the music, explaining what you want, and really listening. She never wanted to look at me playing. She didn't want to be influenced by the instrument, or by the way of playing it, or by the gestures, because I use a computer to process the sound of my bass. She didn't want to see what is on the screen, so she always turned her back to me. And she never asked a question about the instrument itself. What range it has. It was just purely what she hears. And I think this is one very important point in her way of working. And also it was like 30 years ago. This is a very moment, I believe, when she discovers how to transmit her music to other people. Because in the beginning, when she was just looking for ideas for that piece, Elemental 2, I remember she wrote me a letter and said, yes, now I have an idea, it's going to start in D minor or major, I don't remember, and then it will modulate in that tonality. And I discussed with her, I said, Eliane, we don't want you, I don't want you to write a piece in D or even in G or whatever, but to express your own music the way you do it with your instrument, with your synthesizer. And it totally changed the way she approached the world. Because since then, she talked a lot more, explaining what she wants to hear, but never in musical terms. There was no more like D or whatever, major, minor. It was, I remember like the small part you heard now, it was about water, this part. And she explained to me how she imagined like water starting at the top of the mountain, being like a very, not even a river, but like just some water becoming like a bigger river, becoming like bigger river, and how this water lived. The beginning of the piece was something also different. She talked to me like for days about a mountain after the rain. So it's not raining anymore, but it was raining on the mountain. And what's the sound of, she wanted to hear that. And I think it's very, we'll ask Zinc Copper how she proceeded with them, but I have this impression that this is the one moment when she defined how to explain her music to other people. Yes.
It's quite a shift, because with a harp synthesizer you have a lot of very precise controls of a large number, maybe some 40 plus parameters. And so now she had to give up that precise control in some ways, but
it's precise, but it's not so precise. And one thing she insisted, talking about her synthesizer, is that because it was one of the, I mean, it's a huge piece, like it's a synthesizer. It's one of the first ones of that brand which were imported to Paris, and she insisted to buy it without a keyboard, meaning like there is a huge part of the control that she didn't want to have. And also, yeah, synthesizer is kind of precise, but because it's like all style analog synthesizers, they move, I mean, the sound changes all the time. So if you put it on like for 5 hours, the sound and the tuning, but also sound quality will be somehow different from like first hour to the 5th hour. So I mean, I don't think she was really like into this control. She was more into dreaming about sound.
I mean, she says in some interviews that she knows exactly when something is right.
Yes.
So that must have materialized also in your dialogue.
Yes, certainly. I mean, as I said, she never wanted to look at me playing, but I used to have like a guitar strap made of leather, and at some point she said, "What is this sound? I don't want this." So I mean, the main change to the bass guitar she made is changing the strap. And since then, I never use leather straps again, in case she comes. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, so she knows when it's that sound. And I know that she filmed a lot because Elemental is in 5 sections. And we first worked on the sections themselves to define how they are. I mean, how they sound. And she really was afraid of the overlapping of them because she wanted it as seamless as possible. So yes, it's very much like defining, saying, yeah, this is it, this is the sound I want, and don't change it. Or at least for some sounds, she said that I can play it a little differently if she's not there. But if she's there, it has to be the same thing.
Given that there's no written score, also you always say she wrote this piece. She kind of wrote it with your sound possibilities or together with you in a very collaborative way. I wanted to ask you about the. Sorry, Mike.
No, yeah.
So you said she has a very distinct sense when the sound is there that she's looking for. But what is harder to decipher, I think, how the form actually evolves out of the sound. Can you share something about that? Because there's the formal process is very, very interesting. There's a constant, very subtle transformation, and then you have to know when the section is over and when to proceed to the next section. How did you figure out the durations and the actual formal development of the?
It's very much kind of her choice. I mean, she has the form way before having the sounds. So in the beginning, from the beginning, I knew it would be like 5 parts of equal durations, and what is the meaning, which are the 5 elements like earth, water, fire, air, and ethers. So this she knew before. She didn't knew what kind of sounds will signify, or maybe will represent those elements. But the form, in my case, came first. And it's a funny thing because, with this piece, I also started, because of that piece, I started my own label and I released that piece as a CD, and it sold pretty well. And so at some point, it was sold out. And instead of repressing it, I decided to re-record it because since it's a piece, I played quite a few times. And now since 20 years, I play it like every year, like a few times each year at least. But already I had it was like 2 years after the premiere of it, and so I decided to re-record the piece. And the funny thing, and the nice thing, which tells a lot about her way of writing, and also tells a lot about the new music of today, is that the two recordings are exactly, they have the same duration. I mean, maybe one is like 1 minute, but not more than 1 minute longer, and the piece is 50 minutes, so it's like pretty much the same duration. The sections are the same, and there is no question that the music is exactly the same. It's clearly her piece, that piece, played by me. I mean, it's the same thing. Except that if you listen at any given moment of it, like what happens at 7 minutes, what happens, I don't know, at 22, it's way different. I mean, the pitches, the notes you actually hear are not the same, the articulation is not the same, but the global music is exactly the same.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. So she starts working with instrumentalists with that piece. Then comes the collaboration with Charles Curtis that has become quite famous as well. And then she starts her Occam series with a solo piece for Rodri Davis of Harp. I think it's 2011. When she said she applied for another 10 years of composing, quite successfully so. And in that series, then she also writes for orchestra, and actually applies the same procedure to her work with orchestral musicians. So she's also working individually with every orchestral musician in a one-to-one sessions before the orchestral piece becomes combined as an orchestral piece. And within that series, there is the Robin. At that time, Robin and Eliane get to know each other, and it's the first step towards the collaboration with Zinc Copper. Maybe you can share a little bit of how that came about.
It was actually Rodri Davies and Charles Curtis. They were two of the 4 people who told me I should go and work with her. And to be completely honest, I hadn't heard of her when it was first suggested to me. But I was obviously curious, and so many people were telling me that I thought there must be something in it. So I visited her, I think, in 2008, 2009, and after having tea and a chat in her flat, she asked me to imagine an image to do with water. And I've done several projects with her since then, and that's always how they started, including the Zinc Copper piece we're going to hear tonight. The first piece I did with her was part of the Occam series. It was a solo tuba piece. And she asked me to think of an image to do with water and do an improvisation on it. And I was born on the south coast in England, in a little harbour town called Shoreham. And when I was a kid, I used to love going to the Shoreham harbour. So I thought I did an improvisation based on my memories of Shoreham harbour. And she was pretty disinterested in it until I played the last sound. And then suddenly her eyes lit up and that's the sound we're going to work on. And then the sound I played was a half, don't want to get too technical, but I was using the half valve on the tuba to filter the sound. So you hear less of the note and more of the overtones, and the overtones are shifting. And then that became the sound that was the basis for the first part of the piece. And the discussion continued to do with water and waves, and she talked about this image she'd seen in an American museum of, it was a picture, I think you know the story better than I do, it's the picture of waves, from enormously long waves to microwaves, like all lined up above each other. And there's obviously a connection to water there, and we worked with them with that sound in terms of making it like small waves moving. And then she said that her pieces, it slightly contradicts what we just heard about the elemental piece, but she said her pieces always have a 3-part form. So they always start low, and then there's a middle section, and then it ends up high. So I just played another sound, and that became the basis for the second section. And after that, I played another sound, and that became the basis for the third section. And each sound, because there are different ranges of the tuba, require a different way of breathing, which I think made the sections very distinct. And that was quite unusual, actually, because the piece was basically done after one session. And maybe it's time to talk more about the Zinc Copper collaboration.
Maybe we go to the Zinc Copper piece next. So maybe you can build the bridge of how that was actually initiated.
I'd done several projects with Eliane Radigue, and Hilary and Eleanor joined Zinc Copper in 2014. And they were both very keen to work with Eliane Radigue, and so that's why we decided to ask her if she'd like to write a piece, compose a piece. Actually, writing is the wrong word, it's to make a piece with the brass instruments. Also, she hadn't done any piece for only brass before. So we visited her in Paris again. She asked for an image to do with water. I think now it's a good time for Hilary and Eleanor to continue the story.
Yeah, I would like to pass on that question to Eleanor, Hilary, whoever you can see. If I understand correctly, it also started with an image, no? So the search for the central water image, like all the Ockham pieces have water imagery as a central metaphor. Okay. So how did you find the image that is guiding you through the piece?
Well, just to go back two steps. I first heard of Eliane Radigue through Krista Hennings, who I was working with, and Krista knew Eliane Radigue, I think, in the 70s, and she just mentioned this person who did this crazy, very interesting synthesizing music. So I sort of checked out Eliane Radigue, and I found it fascinating. Then I found her address in Paris, and I thought, I'm just going to send her a CD of my music. I didn't think that anything would come of that, but in fact, she received the CD and she sent me a postcard, maybe a month later, saying, just a very short, very nice postcard, and she said, oh, thanks for the music, and I think we're in the same boat, which was fantastic, and she remembered that when we finally met. It was probably 8 years later that we met, because I think I sent her the CD in 2008 and we met her in 2016. So then there was this image of a boat, which of course is something to do with the ocean. So I always had that in my mind. And another nice little story is, for some reason I decided to take the bus to Paris from Berlin. I don't know why, I didn't feel like flying. So I took the bus, which was a very long journey, and I spent the whole night on the bus listening to her music. And I have to say I was very excited to meet her because her music had a big impact on me. So it was fantastic to listen the whole night and then arrive and then go to her flat. And there she was, and we had some tea. And it was very relaxed. And we just talked about the ocean, and then somehow we all, I don't know exactly who came up with it, I think it was more of a collective decision. We thought, let's start in the depths of the ocean. So the piece that we play tonight starts really in the depths of the subharmonic ocean. So it's a little bit obvious, but the tuba starts. And from there we go to the surface. That's essentially the piece. And it's an extremely interesting process because in the beginning it didn't really sound like much. And then we had some more tea and we talked. Then she gave a few hints, a few things, and then we played again. And then she said, okay, then we went the next day, we did 2 days. And then we played it again. It was the same. And I had the feeling that we were the synthesizer. And she was tweaking us. She was twisting here, twisting there. And slowly her music appeared. And then by the end of that day, the second day, suddenly, it was like, this is Eliane Radigue, this is really strange. And she said, great, okay, now it's not ready yet, you have to now play it. So then we're not allowed to perform it. She says, okay, now you have to practice it. So we then, for the next 2 years, we played it whenever we could. We didn't play it in public, we just rehearsed it. And then we was partly waiting for an opportunity, and then suddenly there was a curator from Portugal who had a show in Milan, and he wanted us to play for an exhibition. And the artist is called Leonor Antunes, and she's a big Eliane Radigue fan. And so the opportunity came to perform the premiere of the piece at the end of 2018. and it just seemed to be the right moment. It was 2 years later, the piece had been cooking, and then, so then we went back to Eliane, and we did 2 more days the same structure. We had tea, we talked, we played, and then by the end of the day, second day, she was completely happy. She was really, I would say, almost ecstatic from what she heard. So actually, the premiere actually was in her flat. The world premiere took place in her flat. And I think that day the cat wasn't there. The first time the cat was there. The second time the cat wasn't there. Yeah, and then the piece was born, and then we've played it twice. We played it once in Milan, once in Venice, and today's the 3rd time. And I think she tends to think that you should play it maybe 10 times, roughly, before you even think about recording it. So, we are recording it. We have a wonderful, we have band, so it's going to record us. You would like to say something?
What I only can say out of what impression I got by her flat, it was a very sweet atmosphere. She was extremely gentle and very friendly, and yes, she had her cat, or it was not actually her cat, but she was taking care of this cat. And she made tea and so, and she would listen to us playing always with closed eyes, and she wouldn't make any big kind of critique or make you feel uncomfortable or weird, because it was kind of weird. Okay, now we are 3, we arrived from Berlin with all of our instruments, and we're going to play an ocean. Okay, wow. So, but she didn't say anything, but she said, okay, let's try a little bit like this and like that. And you could feel that she was feeling happy in this process. And she said something that I think I will never forget. She said that by getting older, you lose a lot of things that she used to love to dance and to travel a lot. And so that nature is extremely wise, that gives you, instead of this, it gives you back 2 or 3 other things that are then so strong. And for her, it is the way of listening. And she said that she's listening with a very different intensity, and she understands so much better sound and music and than when she was younger. That this is for her a beautiful gift, and I think she was experiencing this, practicing with us. She gave us her credit card to go and eat in a restaurant on the evening as a thank you that we went there. And so yes, then the next day we came there again, and we kind of started to well-tune it a little bit. But the experience was very much on this human level, that you meet a person who has been through several things in her life, good ones and bad ones, but is kind of in balance with this. And I mean, we met her when she was 85 already or so. And she was very... She could embrace us by not making us feel at all, okay, I'm here, the big diva, and you arrived here asking something from me. She made us feel very good on this way. Yeah.
Probably also many of you know that she's a practicing Buddhist since the 70s. And there's often an analogy that, as far as I know, she doesn't like to draw so strongly between her musical and her meditative practice. But is that something that occurs to you as an interesting quality of her music?
Afraid we need... Oh no, it works. We can continue.
Meditation. Actually, it's another nice little story related to that question. I saw Kasper play Elemental 2 in Paradiso in Amsterdam, maybe, I don't know, 2007 or something. And I just, at that time, I just started to get into yoga. And I guess it's the structure of the piece. Because I was really into sort of yoga and, earth, water, blah, blah, all this stuff. And so I heard Kasper play, and then I met him afterwards, and I said, I think I know the structure. And I said, it's the elements. And he probably doesn't remember. I remember that conversation, and I was really happy that I could recognize it. But also that's very interesting, because that means that the idea of the piece is very clearly transmitted. The elements are very clearly there. And so yeah, of course, yoga is mostly about meditation. And for me, to play this piece, you really have to enter into a state of some kind of meditation. You have to really be in the present. You can't think about what's coming next. But at the same time, you have to sort of know where you're going to go to, but you have to really be in the moment, which is very challenging, and it requires a kind of mixture of extreme concentration, and actually there's quite a lot of physical strength. We play very quietly, but to play a brass instrument quietly requires actually a lot of physical strength. So it's a sort of, it's a kind of asana, this piece. So that's my answer.
I'd like to have a small follow-up question. I mean, it's clearly not an improvised piece, like we heard. It's a very clear composition, and but there's still this fluidity to it. Can you say a little bit more about that? How it's between the specificity of the piece and the control you need to find that specificity?
The form is very clear. It's rising from the bottom of the ocean to the surface of the ocean, so that stays constant. How we rise is very different, and we're still exploring it, and it also depends on the room we play in. We found that certain pitches work really nicely in this room, so we've decided that we're going to, at some point near the end of the piece, meet around this pitch. So I certainly wouldn't say it's an improvisation, it's certainly not a free improvisation, but it's not all prescribed. The details are not prescribed. The details is the artist will respond in the moment to what's happening. And when it's really working, it doesn't feel like it's the three individuals playing. We're just inputting into the system, which is playing itself. It becomes one thing, which I suppose is quite meditative when you use the sense of the separation between yourself and the sounds of other people. I just wanted to say something about the cat, because when I first met her, she told me an anecdote about a cat, which I always remembered. That when she was working with the ARP synthesizer, she was working alone, except her cat was there. And she said that the cat would always respond when the music was right, and that this would be the cat was her audience, her first member of the audience. And I can't remember what the cat did, something with the ears, or got up, and she said, yeah, that's showing it's going right. So,
she actually also said she was kind of a little bit ambiguous about the collaboration with Kasper. But the cat responded very calm to the collaboration with Kasper, and so it was a good collaboration. Maybe it's a good moment to open for questions from the audience in case you have any. Anyway, we want to open to your questions. So we'll give you a little time if there's anything else to ask or answer. And I have a last question to this process of zooming into the very subtleties of the pulsations between the different partials and the different wavelengths and so on, also important in music. Is that zooming in that is very present in both pieces? Is that something that requires a different kind of attention and a kind of different resolution of attention than you use in your other performances or pieces?
Okay. No, I mean, what is interesting with her attitude is, of course, now she's not writing any electronic music at all. She only writes for musicians and mostly for acoustic instruments. But it seems obvious to me that she comes from an electronic mind, and this is because she used to write a lot of electronic music with synthesizer, that she can now look at the music differently. And actually in a very new way. I mean, and so it is not such a surprise that now, like, the younger generation really like her music, I mean, because she kind of became now kind of star. But mostly because of those younger people, well, of course, much more used to electronic music than generations before, but also because it requires, I would think, a different look at what music is. So music is maybe no more like a collection of rhythms and pitches and notes, but it's more like a mental image of what you want to talk about. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the electronic music probably is, I mean, I would say it's closer to like painting than writing classical music. I mean, the question is not about how to construct your piece of music, but what's the meaning of it, and what the final version will be, what the final image will be. Yeah, it's much more in terms of image.
So are there any questions from you? No questions. I think then we actually are pretty much on time and can take a short break and return for the piece in 15 minutes for... Yeah, 10, okay, I suggest let's do 10 minutes. 9 minutes, and then we return to our commotion.